Welcome to Fontribute, where we talk about fonts and their attributes. Fontribute. I'm Thomas. I'm here with Erin and Erin. Hey, everybody.
Woo!
Woo!
Hello.
Double vision today. Hi.
So, Aaron Bell, in this case, because one is with an A, one is with an E. Aaron Bell is a type designer in Seattle, and he's part of TypeThursday Seattle, and it's really exciting to have you join us for this week on Fontribute.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Aaron, what are we going to talk about this week?
Uh-oh. So Aaron and Thomas, we're talking about Aaron's project he's been working on, which is a fun, bubbly, wait, where's the slide? Shoot, I can't see this. Oh, now I'm on it. A fun, bubbly typeface called Willie, which I had difficulty finding something that looked similar to it for us to compare to, definitely on font stand that we usually use. So I found Sheepish, which was released by Scrowleyfonts, which is the same theme, but very different approach to like how the letters are constructed. So I'm so glad you did a fun display thing that we get to talk about, because it's fun. Fun is the most fun to talk about. So tell us more about your project.
So Willie, all right. So basically what ended up happening was I was listening to music one day and I saw this album that I really liked the letter forms of it. And it was sort of this geometric shapes with outlined letter forms that I was just like, oh, that's kind of a cool idea. And so I started playing with those letters and just like sketching them in different ways and creating different things. And then what ended up happening is I drew this W, the lowercase w, this guy right there, that I looked at it and I was like, oh, hold on, there's something here. And it was so much fun. And I loved sort of how these little in-strokes would create this pudginess to the letter forms. It made them feel full and kind of energetic. And so I started going through and like trying to figure out how I could bring that to every single letter. And some of them were a lot more challenging than other ones. So like the F, for example, having to say, okay, well, I have the stroke, I have the upper part, the bottom part. Some of those characteristics bringing in was quite a challenge. And then the diacritics later were a whole different ball game. But I really liked creating this font, and I really had a good time in just making the letters as fun as I possibly could.
Fantastic. Very cool. Yeah, we'll have a chance now to look at a few of those letters close up, and then in our tested Fontribute format, we'll look at some other settings as well, and those tasty diacritics. So looking forward.
Excellent. Let's get started.
Cool. Mosey on over.
Over to the end.
I call this one the butt.
Yes. It's so abstract when you just see it as a shape like this. You wouldn't know, so it's very fun. Obviously, Sheepish took a more literal approach. That's like a lot more. Well, what does that even mean, Aaron? Okay, whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It looks more like a regular, and we'll notice their overlap is always going to be on this sort of side, and you had curves going this way, so that's going to be fun to see how that changes the decision-making process. But Thomas, do you want to say anything?
Well, yeah. I mean, a couple of notes. One is we can see the stroke contrast difference between the two. Sheepish is a lot thicker in its bolt and its stroke outline compared to Willie. We can see that much. As Aaron said, the ordering of the layering seems different between the two. Like it's almost as if Sheepish is like stroke 1, stroke 2. Well, here it seems to be this guy's in front of this guy, and I make a face.
Oh, beautiful!
Artistic skill, guys. Okay, so besides that, obviously the kind of decisions of how this area is defined versus the counter shape between the two strokes, you can see a difference in Sheepish versus in Willie between the two, and those are the observations I can see so far in the N in this case.
I think something also that's worth pointing out is it's a little subtle, but the descenders are not quite at the same height.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is slightly higher than the first one, and that is also true at the X height as well, where the second one kind of sits just a little bit above the second one. And I really wanted to give this sense of like things just sort of expanding out a little bit, and I didn't want it to feel too regular, too normal. So that's where that came from.
Nice. Yeah, good point. It does feel a little bit more like dimensional and like I guess, yeah, three-dimensional.
Three-dimensional.
Yeah.
Sheepish does, yeah. There's definitely some perspective, which is, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. That is very cool.
And that actually gets
go
played out later in some of the other letter forms, where the more complicated ones, they feel even more dimensional, just because there's so much stuff, and your brain just kind of forces them into the X dimension, the Z dimension.
Mm-hmm. Good point. That is so cool. Now, yeah, should we move to the O?
Yes.
I mean, the circle, you mean?
At this point, I'll jump in. So the big one is clearly the lack of a counter in Willie versus Sheepish. So that's a very clear distinction right there. But I'll leave that for now. Erin, I want you to jump in too. So what else do you see? Nice.
Well, I'm glad you. Okay. Yeah, it's so fun. The fun abstract connections you can make with these shapes is just infinite. I won't get into any further ones on Sheepish. I'll just call it a donut. We'll be rated PG. But I think this is a good example where you can see where there was a different approach to just the overall shape. Willie, again, I don't know if we explicitly talked about it, but it has much more rectangular, wide sort of character. Almost, I mean, every glyph is kind of taking that same sort of rounded rectangle sort of shape, a lot wider. Sheepish does have a lot more round, very circular round elements, which we shall see in a moment, and a lot more. I mean, just adding these tiny little dots and details, there's a lot more visual texture happening in Sheepish, like a lot of it's not as regular. We will see more later, but yeah, I think that's it. I'll be brief.
All right, let's keep moving. So now around the straight come together, and we have the D, and we definitely see some really fun decisions from this. So definitely the first one is, again, like, look at so we're all doing the same approach of, like, here's a main stem, right? And then there's the arch around it. Bolt actually made the decision that the bowl section, this is in front of the stem. Both made that decision, right? So we can see that in both design directions so far.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like that you decided to simplify the form instead of adding, extra complication in yours. It works a lot better, I would say. I mean, in terms of keeping with your theme. And I also like, Erin, how you you kept the stems like quite thick in a lot of your characters, which is also kind of neat. That's a big difference between them as well. In Sheepish, all of these vertical strokes you'll see are much thinner than the bowls, so we're going to see a lot of contrast in that regard. Can you call that contrast? I think you can. I mean,
it is a kind of contrast, isn't it?
Yeah,
really thick the thins. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of found like that you needed the thicker stems just to kind of give it this the mass that it needs to hold up to the rounds and everything else.
Yeah. Another note to see is even how the stems are handled. Like, notice the much more circular radius in Willie versus this like this weird, like not weird. It's like how best to describe it? I don't know how to describe this. It's almost as if like it's a curve and then it kind of like and then kind of comes back down again.
Yeah.
It's hard to articulate, but it's very different in approach than this kind of more like, I almost see it as almost continuous curves in Willie as opposed to an abrupt change in direction that Sheepish is doing in its stem.
Yeah, I kind of like to imagine like a balloon that's been overfilled, and you just it just fills out everything. So all of like the straights have basically disappeared in favor of these kind of more roundy forms.
Nice analogy.
Yeah, do you think, I mean, would it be fair to say this is like an inspiration or calling to bubble letter in the graffiti language? Or is that a fair analysis so far?
I mean, I wouldn't say I was thinking about that, but I can totally see your point. I was kind of thinking of clouds, actually.
Oh.
One of the early names for this font was Cloudy, just because I like the imagine of like these really just puffy clouds and things that are just taking up the space, and they just kind of coming together, and they look like letter forms.
Very lovely. I'm looking forward to the marketing on that.
Aww, I like it. Ooh. So this is fun. Are we all on Y? Yes, we are. Oh, maybe. Oh, sorry. I'm not following along. I'm in my own little world. So
no, we're on Y.
This is so funny. I mean, in Sheepish, there are some very strange, unusual things I would never have expected, which I kind of like, but they're bizarre. Like how the tail of the Y and the G and some of the other characters completely overlaps that bottom of the bowl. It's just like so unusual. I find that very funny. So in that case, we do we do have a lot of dimension that thrusts out at you, which is just so strange to see. Willie's is like feels more twisted, turny sort of thing. Like there's kind of like a thrust going backward that dimension or direction. If I had to say one thing when I was looking at this Y, I kind of wondered why this side it seemed like a little bit thinner or less important than than the other two. Like I thought maybe it felt just like a teeny bit too thin or something like that. I don't know if anyone else is seeing that.
That was actually something I don't not quite sure of myself yet. Like I was kind of in this dimensionality of the letter forms, I kind of thought, okay, well maybe the other stem of the Y is kind of behind the first one, and so it is the same width, but you just can't see it. But at the same time, I totally see your point that it kind of becomes a little bit too weak, perhaps.
Yeah, it doesn't hold. Yeah, it just here's the visual impression. You're feeling like this is a unit, and then this is inherently thinner.
Right.
There's the impression of it. It seems like. Which by the way, we're seeing that exact same scenario here. Like, notice how these stems are working versus this beast. Just like, so a variation of like where the thick thins are. We remember that in the D. Right? Remember the D, like the round thickness versus the stem, was significantly different between the two. The stem was much thinner than the round part was treated in Sheepish. So there's a little. I can see this. That's a question in this form, in this aesthetic to deal with. But we'll see in tests in language and words how this works out.
Nice.
But also keep in mind too, like notice that both actually I noticed just right now, both are doing the approach of instead of a Y like this, right? They're both doing Ys in this form. At least maybe I think maybe Willie's doing that. Actually, that's a little. I'm not 100% sold either direction.
Maybe not. We don't even know. Yeah, it's just
doing its thing,
It is. It's very fun.
Yeah,
cool.
I wonder, but I think even the very fact that I'm slightly ambiguous of which form of the Y Willie is doing is telling right there, right? That's an interesting question right there, immediately in my mind.
Yeah. Although, one more thing. I know we're going to town on this Y, but yeah, I think obviously I know that this, you were trying to keep this side kind of a little bit more straight, like you had been establishing in the other profiles. And maybe that's, I guess why this would look thinner. If you brought it out, then it would like create that angularity that doesn't really exist anywhere else if it started to have like a angle that direction. So that is hard. It's like how thick would you want this tail to be? That does it then lose its recognizability or something? I don't know.
Exactly. It might actually be an easier solution to try and pull this back just a little bit, and just sort of see how that could look, because that might just be a little bit cleaner. So because as you said, you don't want to make the tail too heavy in comparison with the upper stems, but at the same time, all these complicated issues in a very simple font.
Type design.
This is great. I'm liking this conversation this week. This is stuff. Okay. Yes. This is where there are a couple characters in Willie that I thought were so interesting, like on their own, how ambiguous. Like this T is just, whoa, it's crazy. And also Sheepish. I also had to feature this character because Thomas, it looks like, oh, wow, beautiful face. Or I thought it looks like a boxing glove or whatever. So that's why it's here. But or oven mitt, depending on how hungry you are. Anyway, but yeah, both of these T's, they both take the approach where they're going to have a tail on the right and like nothing happening here on the left side. So they kind of do have that same, I guess, underlying skeleton like Thomas usually draws. But and I guess, when it comes down to it, they kind of look a little bit more similar than most of the other characters between the two typefaces, which is funny. But again, with Sheepish, there's just the enormous, bulb like we saw on the Y kind of pushing forward. Do you want to tell us about the design of the T maybe, or like why, like how you came to this conclusion versus something I don't know, something that didn't. Just it's so unusual. Tell me more about it. Sorry.
Oh, so I can't remember which one came first, the T or the F.
Yeah.
But those two were kind of intrinsically linked. Basically, like, after having done all these other letter forms, which had this very, chunky feel, I was like, okay, well, the T and the F, they have this crossbar, which I'm going to have to figure out how to deal with.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really sure how that was going to work. And I've eventually kind of came up with this sort of, as you can see, like this layered effect where they would just kind of have influence with each other. Now, I was thinking, I think at one point of like, putting a bit here, which would make it a little bit more recognizable as a letter form. But at the same time, there was something kind of fun in the fact that it wasn't super clear. That, you look at it and you're like, yeah, I get that that's a T, but at the same time, I'm not totally sure that that's a T.
Sure. Yeah, and like you said, putting on the other side, it kind of messes with the flow of the profile and the spacing about everything you've been doing.
Exactly.
Yeah, it looked very, very cool.
Yeah.
So I did find that this layered approach just made things easier for bringing the letter together to have those elements connected to each other. And I thought it connected also well with the way I've had like the bowls connecting with the straights and everything else in that way.
Nice.
Yeah. Also, want to take note for everybody to see is that, notice the same approach in the stem, right, in Sheepish. We saw in previous letters are being applied here. There's overemphasis in the bottom, as pointed out, and just compare that to in Willie's decision. Yeah, I think the question is really notice this again feels heavier than up here and here. So that I feel like there's still some tensions in the weight distribution of how things are stacking together and the impressions you're getting because of that. So that's my impression so far. But the testament will be in words to see how this pans out.
For sure.
Very cool. So let's look at the related letter F.
Yeah, there we go.
This is funny. So the sheepish is actually really funny because it's just the T flipped. I don't know if you remember, just a second.
Oh.
It's pretty.
Now it's an uppercut. Like now it's an uppercut.
Bam.
Yeah. It's pretty much the same form. It's very, very slightly different. I'm looking at them side by side right now in a different screen. And it's like the T was a little thicker up at the top and there was a little bit more of a curl. But beautiful, yes. Very angry fists of fury. But Willie, you decided, okay, let's go south. Let's go south. There aren't a lot of like prominent descenders in it. So I actually found this to be very like unusual. I wasn't expecting this. But did you do that because it was too ambiguous with the T?
I actually did it because I wanted something to balance the top weight.
Okay.
I like, because you kind of look at Sheepish and you have like this really heavy weight up here, and then you just have like nothing down there. So in creating this one, I had this heavy weight up top, and I was like, all right, well, I should have a heavy weight to balance it on the bottom, because otherwise, if you just had it like this, you'd just be like, oh, it feels like it's almost about to topple over. And so having that descender kind of gave it this extra little strength, so it feels more holistic as a letter form.
Yeah, I find it interesting because it's like a cursive form in this kind of sans serif upright model we've been seeing so far. So just structurally, formally, it's a very interesting surprise to see this form of F in this design so far.
Yeah, and the fact that it's like it really is like three-dimensionally twisting, which doesn't happen too often throughout the typeface. So I'm not 100% sold. I want to look at those text samples because there was part of me that thought that maybe this looked like a little too deep, like maybe it should have been cut off or something. I thought maybe it was. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. We should all look at it together.
But important information.
Yeah.
And here we are.
Whee!
Starting to come together.
Cool. Oh, they're so cool. I mean, it's neat how the cloud, bubbly, fun letter genre can be taken in very different directions. It's just so funny. They have very different feelings to me. I'll stop blabbing for a second. Tommy, what do you see when you look at the...
Yeah, I definitely see the clouds, right? I think I definitely, especially on the Willie project above, like it feels like everything's floating away. And I think it is surprising too is like in this genre, the spacing, right? If you notice that. It's interesting. It's interesting in outline font because that's also what this is. This is also an outline font. So it's like, how do we harmonize the counter spaces and letter spaces between shapes? In this case, actually, the counters don't really exist. They're all gone. So this is actually more letter space between the spacing. How they harmonize together with this kind of extreme boldness that's occurring. So I'm curious how, okay, I'm curious how this is going to pan out, seeing the more. For me, yeah, just again, those are my general notes. I actually don't mind the F setup. I actually think it's kind of fun, and when I'm seeing it so far, I do have some moments of concern, especially when it's things like that, specifically that the H and the lowercase n, they're really similar.
Yeah.
So I would expect either a solution like this, like what Sheepish is doing, or some kind of suggestion of stroke order and orientation in the N. So right now I see some tension in that. Things like the M are a little more successful or a little more clear to me. Maybe because I don't see an opportunity for confusion so far.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because when I was doing the H and then the capital N as well, I was like, okay, how do I make these look different without them being different? And I don't know if we have a sample of the N here, but I ended up using this twisting form to make the N kind of feel more like a capital N, but I totally see your point of the capital H and the lowercase n kind of looking the same. And I think, maybe bringing in some additional lines in the H or something like that, potentially like this or
nice.
Yeah,
that's incredibly yeah.
Sorry.
You're welcome.
I'm so stupid. What's wrong with me? Or you could just go more. Oh no! I feel gross drawing on that. Never mind. I'll stop.
Just stick your pen down in there and draw some stuff.
Oh, it's so gross. I love it. I mean, gosh, this typeface is so fun. Oh, good lord. Other than that, so I really appreciated this. Yeah. Fitting. Yep. So if people are not catching on to what I'm pointing at, is that the X height is here, but the I and the J, he lowered it down here to make the tittle much larger and kind of allowed it to be a bit more connected and close to the base. It's very cool, very nice detail.
So interestingly, in the original version, the I was even lower.
Nice.
Oh, really?
I just thought it was the most crazy, awesome thing I'd ever seen. And then I went to add the dotless version of the I, and it was just too much. And I was sitting there looking at it going well, I could have an alternate dotless I, but then I was thinking, well, then the diacritics wouldn't line up properly, and then everything would be like, okay, let's just raise it up a little bit, not to the full X height, but raise it up a little bit so that things are just, there's a little bit of character there, but it's, it'll still work if there's no tittle on it.
It's so cool. So one other thing, okay, well, I know I was talking about that F. Maybe what I'm seeing is that it's a little too pointy in that corner or something. I think that might be something, or just shaving off a tiny bit. Maybe that's the thing that's irritating me about it. I'm not sure.
Totally. I actually see it, especially compared to the G. You can see the curve is much smoother in the G than in the F. So yeah,
that might be it. And then while we're here, I know we're trying to move along quickly, but also just to talk about Sheepish a little bit more. This is really funny to me. These extremely oversized R.
A freaking nozzle.
And nozzle, good point. The I, they did this in the L as well. It's so unusual how far over that tail went, and it really kind of, I think it's going to have a lot of issues in the spacing. It's going to make it look a little weird, but I won't jump ahead of myself. I can't wait to see it.
It looks like an exclamation mark that's been flipped upside down.
He's very sad. He's tired. Very funny. Cool. Should we go to the next slide? I know we're trying to be punctual here. I crammed everything interesting into one slide. Yes.
Woo! Excellent.
Woo! The complicated stuff. This is hard because I had to include the ring glyph because this is the hard point where how do you keep this theme going without introducing
I know
counters? Yeah,
I know. Something else. Could you have done like
a donut?
Or something?
Yeah, I was struggling with that because I was really trying to avoid complications with the dot above.
Oh yeah, right.
And I ended up just I put the ring in there because that was the only thing I could think of that might work, and I think it could use some more work.
Or maybe you could do the like connected form. Like sometimes people do an A ring or whatever like that. Maybe there's an opportunity for it to come out of this and have a little thingy. I don't know.
Yeah, it's not a bad
Maybe.
idea. Huh.
Not sure. But anyway, I know we're getting into the details. I'll just comment I love that you were able to have some directionality in the acute and grave. That was very cool. It looks like a twisty piece of pasta or something over here with the tilde.
Exactly.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. This the Sheepish designer of Sheepish, they went like a lot more loopy and really long. I think it's a little too large. Like it's overwhelming the character, I think. If I were to criticize that. And then what else do I want to say about these things? Oh, you know what, Tommy, why don't you probably have gathered your thoughts while I've been yakking.
Well, I think there's a couple of things I really appreciate in Willie. One is your decision of fractions. Very nice move.
Oh,
that's
so
really fun.
Good.
Thank you.
Also, even the numerals overall, like I think they're very in tone of what you're trying to do, and still work. Surprising with the very limited legibility of this 4, especially.
Yeah.
I knew it was a 4. I didn't have to really guess that far.
One interesting point on the fractions, I initially had tried to do them as a single merged form, and I couldn't read them. I just couldn't read them. I was like, okay, I give up. I'll accept this to be not more merged.
Very cool.
Yeah, contrast that to the fraction decision on Sheepish, for example.
Right.
I find like their solution of the exclaim and the question mark is not as successful, perfectly reasonable, but not as successful as your approach. This kind of feels more integrated overall. I kind of do for some reason it does feel kind like I do wish these could be larger.
Yeah.
In your case, in some way they seem a little meek compared to how beefed out it is next to the numbers.
I would agree.
Yeah.
And even the quote marks to me looked small compared to the comma. Comma. Oh, Lord help me. Yeah. Or maybe even
maybe the comma's too big.
Opportunity to maybe the comma's just too big.
Yeah, something. Honestly, I think something in the middle between the two. I think the quotations are too small, but the comma is too big.
Yeah, I think the punctuation probably could use a bit more work.
Yeah, that might. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, as a last note, I kind of wish this has a little more beef on the stem. Like, does that make sense? Like, I almost feel like I know you've been kind of like I just feel like it gets lost versus your. Like, I read it as a Y, but yeah, we go laugh at that.
I think the other interesting thing that I've noticed in that this kind of stem ending here, as say compared to the number 1, like this is a much more rounded form. This is a bit more squared off. Yeah. And it'd be nice to bring a little bit more connection between those two.
I can see that.
And then, of course, there's some of the spacing issues, some of this and that, and some of these other things that pop up.
Like you said, like like Tommy was saying earlier. I mean, of an outlined font like this, spacing becomes like far more important than in other typefaces because there's like nowhere to hide. It's like people can clearly see the distances really well. It's so
exactly.
Oh, God. It's gonna be fun. You've done. I think you've done a good job so far. Anyway, with that, I don't know. For the sake of time, should we move to the next?
Yes.
Thingy.
So it begins the paragraph setting.
Yes. So I know this doesn't make any sense because this is a typeface not intended for this use, but maybe there's a couple sentences, and this is just a good overview, just for folks to see. I mean, spacing is important, and I think it's good to look at texture and how these decisions work together. I definitely think Willie is just absolutely phenomenal, the way it uses space and negative shapes, and just I absolutely love it. Sheepish, some of these things that we've noticed. Well, one thing I would say, the cap letters versus the lowercase in Sheepish, it's like there's a lot of disparity in the sizes.
Yeah, so sizing and weight.
It's, like depending on what you're going for, you might want or might not want that. And I think that the delicateness, the tininess of all of the punctuation looks not as integrated as it could be. I think it looks a little too small. That's something I would say.
I feel like sometimes, because I think the same stroke weight was used across different sizes, like size shapes, I get the impression like the quotation marks are heavier. That's a weird application. I mean, this is I did an outline font before, so trust me, this is an issue I was well aware of. And you know, the simple answer is, well, it wasn't made for this purpose. But if color and typography are things that matter to you, this is a problem you have to accept or deal with in some capacity. So I'm seeing that clearly. The size variations are not as dramatically different in Willie, so this issue is not as overcoming or as serious as an issue versus the size discrepancy in Sheepish. I could say that.
Right. Wow. Now that we're looking at this scale, looking at the difference between the comma, the quotes, and like what you chose to do for the quote mark there, and these, I don't even remember what language is this, if it was a Czech word or not. Polish, Czech, shoot, I don't remember. But I find that kind of interesting that they're all a little different. I prefer this drawing you've done to like this one. It looks a little more square.
Yeah, no, I agree. I totally agree. So
that's something I just wanted to point out. And also, this is interesting to me. Look at this, the capital L versus the D.
I was looking at that before, Erin. Good call.
A little small, I think, or something.
Yeah. I think at one point I tried making the L bigger, and I kind of gone back and forth. But yeah, I'm actually staring at it right now. I'm like, I think that L should be a bit taller. Give it a bit more, chunk compared to some of those lowercase letters.
Sure. Very interesting. Anything else anybody want to say? I know we're like trying desperately to not make this an hour and a half program.
Yeah, just again, like as we said before, the whole spacing relationships, like this, you know what it is? This feels like something here's the thing. This feels like letters that have been outlined that aren't speaking to each other, right? When I feel like Willie's, they are speaking with each other.
Yeah.
That's because the attention of the negative spaces. That's the initial impression I'm getting. Even though this has like a darker outline, so this should stand better together. I think actually the stroke weight was a good move for Willie at this size.
Yeah, it looks very delicate. It looks real good. One other thing, just while we're talking about it, I think another reason why this looks weird is the space character of Sheepish is really why it's like too big, it's too large. So if anyone's like a really newbie and wants to like get some ideas based on the Sheepish, I would say like check the space character of typeface that looks like as spotty as this one does. It just look that's one of the issues. Also, like look how interesting the decision, like I was noting on the I to make that. Like the words just look, I think they look really strange with that tail.
They're not harmonizing.
Yeah.
You get the same thing with the L there too.
Yeah.
And the R.
It's a little ridiculous. The R is so funny.
Giant nose on the R.
Yeah, schnozzle. Yep.
Yeah. It's funny. I like it, but I like the typeface, but it's like, yeah, definitely doesn't look, I think, as polished.
It's cohesive.
As it could be. So we have one more slide. I don't know if we should.
Before we jump into that, I just want to make a comment. I'm definitely sold the why that terminal needs to be heavier. Like it's definitely losing
on the right side.
Too much real estate compared to like it's just not harmonizing in words.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. One last slide. Boom.
Yeah, one last thing. So I included the S set because I think this is going to be
shout out to the set. Yeah.
This will have some interesting conversation, or that must have been really difficult to like get all that in one space.
Yeah, so, that was a really fun character to do. And I ended up, I thought it was hilarious as I created it, and I looked at it, I'm like, it's like a dude walking. It's like there's his body, he's got his head, his arm. He's just like doing his stroll down the street.
That's one foot. The second foot. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, well, I got to keep that now because that's just off the hook.
That is so crazy. I have to say, as much as I like him walking, to me, it's strange that he's one of the only ones that has a counter, has that space.
Right.
Was there a way you could join the legs together and just make this a line and like do it like that?
That's interesting. Interesting.
I'm sorry. I had to say it.
It's okay. I forgive you.
You gotta do something about that.
I think I have an idea for what I could do to bring that together. And it would be pretty cool.
Because actually over here, Sheepish, I guess they kind of did a very similar kind of to what I was imagining. Although the balance seems really off. There's way too much weight on one side than the other, maybe. But this kind of reads to me. It does. So I think it could work over here.
The only annoyance for me is that in general, my rules was that objects on the left should take priority over objects on the right. So that's why everything kind of goes up like this. Except here, as you can see in the N, I had to have this go in order to show that it's an N.
Right.
And so my worry in following kind of this sort of model is, yeah, I mean, it can do that and then have this, but then it's going to put this right side in front of the left. And I'm like, okay, well, how? So I have to think about that a little bit more, I think.
I would like to see that. I think it's worth trying. I mean, it's actually interesting. This slide is great because now we get to see some of those weird instances where you had to problem solve and kind of break the rules in order to like make the characters read. So in those cases, you know, like you do have a much more, I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe these is the lines and the lines here are, they might be a little too rectangular, I'm thinking, or something.
Yeah.
Ends, or
you could probably puffify it a little better. Yeah.
A little bit more. But I really like the Ogoniak, or whatever the heck you pronounce it. I think that was handled really well because you did make that distinction right here. Like, this is an accent. It's not a cue. Like you put that little extra bit of information in there so people could tell. It was an addition, not just part of the, part of the form. Anyway, I'm talking too much.
I gotta be honest, for both of these, I had no idea those were Ogoneks.
Really?
I had no reading of that's Ogonek.
Maybe that's just because we don't know the language. I imagine it's easier if in context if you can speak. But and also, oh man,
I mean that's insane.
Bad spacing. They needed to make this much smaller. So don't do that, people watching. Don't do that.
One last note, I will say, I do feel like this 5 needs better articulation. It's too close to an S, like compared to the S. Like there's a difference, but it's not enough. Like I actually had to go over here to assess that this was a 5.
Okay.
Yeah, I did put those side by side because I'm like, oh, maybe there's a little bit more differentiation that could happen. Like maybe this gets a little bit rounder or larger or something, or I'm not really sure what.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that just having this stroke going up versus going down would help clarify the form. But yeah, it sort of sounds like from what you guys are saying that maybe it needs a little bit more emphasis just to help make it a bit clearer.
Yeah.
It could be.
One last
I like
note.
how you. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, the G. I was going to say that.
Yep. I have a great minds think alike. Erin, you want to take it first?
Oh, it's just so funny. I had to include bingo because, well, one, I thought this G was just like really messed up and horrible. And, sorry, that was the one character that annoyed me the most out of this typeface. I think you handled the G pretty well. That must have been really hard to not make it look like like a C, or how do you articulate like when you don't want to have curls happening on the interior? You actually decided instead of making the interior more descriptive, you decided to add that kind of like tail on the bottom,
a stem, basically.
To articulate. And actually, to me, it worked really well. What were you going to say? Great mind,
Thomas. Well, see, we both ended up there for different reasons. I actually thought for a second, and it's related to say like I saw this, I thought this was an E. So then I thought, is this a euro sign? And then I looked at that, I'm like, that's not a euro sign. So I just want to point out my confusion of that point on both types. Like, there's confusion there in some capacity or way.
That's true. That's true. Well, this was a weird context. G39 bingo. That was a little hard, but I guess I chose that in order to demonstrate that in these sort of typefaces, I mean, it's hard to distinguish between numbers and letters. You just need to have the context, I think. So I was just going to comment that I do agree. I think this is a good solution, but I don't think fully sold yet, just because where my confusion came from this.
Interesting. I wonder if like extending this down a bit more would help clarify that, or would that start to look a bit more like a P? You know what I mean? I don't think so. I don't think it would look like a P. No, the P's over here. I would never think that. No, not a capital, like a lowercase p. Oh, lowercase p. Because things are so similar, it kind of has this, or like, here you look at the lowercase g, it kind of has that similar form. All right, maybe I'm thinking of a Q. Never mind. But yeah, maybe you could make a little more. I mean, and then if you're adding that level of like a little bit more finesse between the heights of overlaps and stuff, again, I'm sorry, but I would think like maybe the F doesn't need to be
like quite as long, or even the S set, like maybe just, well, I guess they would go in tandem, but like,
well, I was
don't
trying
know.
to keep this the same descender as sort of the G
Try to
and the
keep it
Y.
similar. Yeah.
But I agree that I think this, maybe if this corner was softened, that it would probably end up feeling a little bit less obtrusive than as it is now, because it kind of has a big butt right there.
Nice.
So,
Sure.
you know, need some attention.
And there's one final thing I wanted to, before I forget. Well, one, looking at this funny R and like it's the spacing anyway, that draws my attention. But actually, one other letter that I didn't get to look at up close was your R, and I'm wondering, like, I'm almost tempted to say, could you make it even like a little fatter, lower, and maybe shorter? Like, I feel like there's a lot of negative space happening here that maybe you could even make it more compact or something. Because like I like how compact your S is, and like, could the R be just as compact? I don't know. Just a thought. Not sure. Oh man, I really appreciate, like, this is so fun to see the C and the E side by side, and they work.
Good move.
It's so subtle, so good.
Good
Anyway.
move.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that was another one of those like, these are going to look very similar. How do I not make them look similar?
I like it.
It was a good strategy. So good. I think that worked very well.
Whew.
So
shall we conclude?
Yes, we shall conclude. I think definitely, who knew that the land of puffy letters could be so diverse with so much complexity? But that's the beauty of it. That's why I think air quotes display typefaces justify the same level of thoroughness as any kind of text face, because it's different nature of considerations, but they're still there. As noted, there's all these considerations and thoughts have to be considered, and it's been really great to explore this whole genre. So thank you, Erin, for letting us use your project as a chance to explore this concept.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It was great to get your feedback and to hear your thoughts.
Yay. Thanks so much, Erin, and thanks for visiting our YouTube stuff, people watching and listening. Thank you. And bring us, if you have a work in progress, email one of us and we'll get you on the show, because it's fun to talk about in progress work. It's so fun, and I'm much nicer when the person's here next to me or talking
online.
Yeah, not as
sort of. Yeah, exactly.
Cool.
Well, awesome, everyone. Have a great week. Erin, thank you again for letting us to join us, and everyone else, we'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye.